Stand by. I'll tell Chris.
The offseason is underway, and Norvell Pell no longer has the distinction of being the newest Knick after waiting until pick 19, which turned into waiting for pick number 21, which turned into waiting for pick number 25. The Knicks selected Houston's Quentin Grimes while acquiring more assets and opening up more cap space. Was that the start of Leon Rose's grand plan to play 4D chess for free agency? We'll have to see it. Hello and welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley free agency special. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. We're happy to welcome back the CEO and creator of Knicks Fan TV, CP, and also happy to welcome back SNY contributor and the host of Sports Illustrated's Laces Out and the titan of Knicks Twitter, Ashley Nicole Moss. We're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. And you can get involved in the comments section throughout this entire stream. But as always, we're going to tip it off with a baseline. So let's start with the current state of the Knicks and how we got here. So, Ian, what did you make of all the moves that the Knicks did on draft night?
You know, I made that they were looking to keep their cap space intact and maybe free up a little more cap space, because clearly with that number 19 pick traded to Charlotte, that freed up some money. And they had liked Quentin Grimes and they had liked McBride, and some of them actually had McBride and Grimes rated at 19 and 20. But once they felt that those guys could be had a little bit later in the draft, I think that led to the impetus in trading back with 19 and 21. So part of the thinking was, let's try to maintain cap space, increase cap space. Part of the thinking was our guys are going to be available back from where we're sitting. So let's make these moves now. They left themselves open to a little criticism if a player taken between 19 and 25 turns into, a multi-year all-star, but I think they'll live with that at the moment because they are looking to get as much flexibility financially for this summer and beyond.
Yeah, they're playing the long-term game for sure. And Ashley, does the Knicks draft haul excite you at this point, or do you think we need to wait and see to judge it based on what's going to happen in the future?
I think CP and I actually agreed on this when we gave our letter grade for this draft. And I gave him a high C, and that's because I was feeling generous that morning. But I think, this is one of those moves that you need to see the bigger picture, and you also need to see what happens in the future. I think looking at it in a very one-dimensional kind of way, you're not happy as a Knicks fan. Good draft picks are hard to come by, and you don't want to just kind of throw those away for something that you feel is really not that significant. But, you have to go ahead and trust the bigger picture, trust the bigger plan. And I think, the Knicks front office, unlike, years prior, actually has a plan moving forward. And, as a Knicks fan, you're definitely a little, apprehensive about trusting anything that has to do with moving draft picks around, because we have a bad track record with that. But I think, this is all about moving forward and stepping into the new generation of the New York Knicks. And that also includes trusting the front office. So, yeah, in hindsight, it wasn't the best draft for us. Letter grade, like I said, it was a high C. But it has the potential to go ahead and move up in the ranks, depending on what the overall unfolding of that plan looks like.
And CP, we're going to get into specific players later in the show, but where would you like to see the Knicks go now with their free agency approach based on what they did in the draft?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it has to be at the floor general. We need to address the point guard position, someone that can create their own shot, someone that can put pressure on the rim, and create some advantages for us in the pick and roll. Can someone get Julius Randle some easier shots in the pick and roll, pick and pop situation? Get RJ Barrett going. So point guard is certainly number one. Secondly, additional wing depth. Someone who can shoot the three. Shot creation is at a premium right now. We need that. It's in high demand. Defense is also going to be key depending on what happens with Reggie Bullock. So someone at the wing that we can pair with RJ Barrett, whether they can play the two or the three. And then also backup big man. Not sure what happens with Nerlens Noel, but we can certainly use a backup big man to Mitchell Robinson, someone who can grab some rebounds that was sorely needed, especially in the playoffs. So those are the three areas that I would emphasize.
No, I definitely think those are all very good points, to make sure this Knicks team is well balanced as a roster, and guys like RJ and Julius get the help they need so it can be an easier season for them. And Ian, are you getting a sense that the Knicks have something up their sleeve moving forward in the offseason? CP3 and Kawhi have both hit the market, or do you feel like it may be until next offseason.
Yeah, I don't think with Chris Paul, I mean, the consensus around people that I've spoken with is he's probably headed back to Phoenix. So unless something changes at the 11th hour, I think his opt-out was giving himself an opportunity to sign a longer deal with more total money. Kawhi Leonard, I think maybe he'd like to exert some pressure on the Clippers by this opt-out, but I don't think he doesn't go back there on a short deal. Unless there's a hiccup again at the 11th hour. So I wouldn't put too much stock in those opt-outs when it pertains to the Knicks. With the Knicks, you're looking at Evan Fournier. We reported earlier that there's mutual interest between Fournier and the Knicks, and I don't think anything's changed since we reported that a couple of days ago. So I think that's a target. And then, it's a revolving door at point guard. You're just wondering which way everything's going to fall. It starts with Kyle Lowry, who seemingly is headed to Miami. I don't know. There's been various reports about that. People I spoke to feel like that's likely to get done. And then what does New Orleans do? Because New Orleans cleared up money for Kyle Lowry, and they are probably not going to match any offers to Lonzo Ball. So do they pivot to Spencer Dinwiddie? I know there's been some talk about a 3-team deal that would send Lonzo Ball to Chicago, Devontae Graham to New Orleans. I think Thomas Satoransky's name had come up in those talks. So there's a bunch of different options for New Orleans there. And I think once those two get settled, you figure out where the Knicks might go. If Dinwiddie's off the board, you know who's left, and it's just a matter of making the money work. But so many moving pieces at lead guard. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, the drama is going to be crazy, I feel like, this offseason, not just for the Knicks, but, a lot of teams in the NBA trying to level up. And once again, write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on. We'll get to them throughout the show. Let's move on to talk about the outside help the Knicks can look to bring in when the league's free agency period begins at 6 p.m. Eastern tonight. So actually, we constantly, as Ian and CP have been mentioning, we find ourselves talking about the PG spot. Which point guards interest you specifically for the Knicks?
I wasn't sold on Lonzo Ball, earlier on when the name kept getting thrown around. But after thinking about it some more, and, CP and I, we've talked about it a lot on our show, it makes sense for multiple reasons. The age is a big factor for me. I'm a big fan of getting guys at, their youngest or in the middle of their prime where they're still able to be molded and kind of acclimated into different systems. I think Lonzo has drastically improved his shooting, but more importantly, I think he's drastically improved at what the true definition of a point guard is, and that is helping to facilitate ball movement on the floor. And I think that's desperately what the Knicks have been missing. I actually am a big fan of Spencer Dinwiddie, obviously has been plagued by injuries, but when he is healthy, it's hard to ignore his impact on the floor. I think he averaged about 20 points, before his injury in the 2019-2020 season. So that's 20 additional points that the Knicks have drastically missed. If you look at that series against the Atlanta Hawks, it's just another scoring threat on the floor. I'm actually not sold on Kyle Lowry. I think his asking price is too high for someone who, to say this respectfully, is on the wrong side of 35. I don't think he's as, sharp as he once was. I think injuries and things like that also play a factor, but also Father Time is undefeated, and not everybody is a freak of nature like LeBron James or Kevin Durant or some of the other older guys or outside of the 30-year-old range. Not everybody has that type of, longevity. Not everybody has that type of stamp of health, right? So I don't think Kyle Lowry is someone you invest, that kind of money into, although the Knicks have the money to blow, and luckily we are in a great position in terms of cap space. I'm a firm believer in just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So I would really be looking at Lonzo, Spencer. I would be really looking at anybody under the age of 25, under the age of 27, if I could. And I think that ultimately is going to be a beneficial aspect to what the Knicks are trying to build, not just this season, because again, this is not a team that's in the rush to win a championship next season. I'm looking more at the big picture, the longevity. Who are guys that we can implement into our system that can grow with this team that ultimately is going to make a splash and going to make an impact to where we want to be a couple of years down the line?
Yeah, I think Lonzo and Spencer would be great additions. Like you said, just because you got the money for a guy like Kyle Lowry doesn't mean you have to go out and spend it, because how many good years are you going to get out of him, despite, all of his, success and awards, winning championships? or winning a championship, you still have to look at the long-term picture. And CP, the comments are going crazy about your sharp look, so you got to keep wearing that fit, man. They love your shine.
Appreciate it, man. So everybody hit that thumbs up button for you boys.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ian, when you look, what do you think the Knicks market activity tells us about how they plan to deploy Luka Vildoza?
I don't think that that's a big factor in terms of what they may or may not do at point guard. I think that, Vildoza, obviously they like him because they signed him, but I don't get the sense that there's any like hard and fast plans about, penciling him into your rotation or not signing a point guard because you have penciling him into your rotation around the time that they signed him. So I don't think that's a significant factor at all. I mean, I know you guys have mentioned Lonzo and Spencer, and it seems like, a lot of people expect Lonzo to end up with the Chicago Bulls. I know Chris Haynes reported that. People I spoke to have said the same thing, unless there's a hiccup here at the 11th hour. So I don't think he'd be a possibility. And so I think for the Knicks, again, it starts with Spencer Dinwiddie. What is he going to do? What's New Orleans going to do? And then you kind of look down from there at the Dennis Schroeders, at the Devontae Grahams, at the campaigns. I mean, there's options there for the Knicks, but there's no doubt they need to upgrade at that point guard position. It's just a matter of what happens around them and who becomes available.
Really, I thought Elfrid Payton, I thought he did a great job. So I'm surprised, you say they need to upgrade. All jokes aside.
Listen, he got a new agent as of recently, so hopefully that brings him some better opportunities elsewhere. Best of luck to you, Elfrid Payton. Just be in New York. That's all.
Yes. It's really all about a fit, right? Sometimes you need to go to a new area, a new destination, new type of scenery, and that can change, how you play. And CP, we saw in the playoffs that the Knicks could really use a player who can create their own offense. Do you think that sort of player can be had in this free agent class? Malik Monk is one name available. Who are you targeting in your mind?
Yeah, Monk is certainly an option, but a guy I would kind of put off and prioritize others. I mean, at the top of the list, it would be DeMar DeRozan. When you look at his assisted rate, which is, the percent of his made shots that he was assisted on, he was at 28% in the league. That puts him in the 100th percentile among wings. So, he's a guy that can get his own shot. We know he's a mid-range assassin. How that fits with Julius and RJ is another question, but, you put DeMar DeRozan here, he's automatically your closing option. I would trust him in late game situations over Julius Randle, and until RJ Barrett continues to prove himself. He could also give you some playmaking as a plus as well, put some pressure on the rim and draw fouls. So I think from a shot creation standpoint, DeRozan is certainly at the top of the list. Secondarily, someone who'd be a cheaper option who I would also look at is Will Barton from Denver. He's a guy that shot 38% from three. He can go out there and get you buckets, also give you some playmaking as well, and would be a cheaper option. At the point guard position, I think at the top of the list, I would look at Dinwiddie. At his peak before the ACL injury, he was at 20 points per game, 6 assists. Also in that assisted rate, he was same as DeRozan this year at around 27%. So Dinwiddie's another guy that can go out there, get his own shot, can come up for you in the clutch and be a nice player to take some pressure off of Julius Randle, which I think would be key in this situation. Secondary to Spencer Dinwiddie, Reggie Jackson from the Clippers, who I think will likely stay with the Clippers. But as Ian said, to the dismay of Knicks fans, you got to put Schroeder in that list as well. Schroeder can go out there and get you some buckets from the mid-range. He can put some pressure on the rim. May not be the best decision maker out there, turns the ball over a ton, but I think Schroeder is a realistic option and someone that can get their own.
Yeah, no, those are all, interesting prospects for the Knicks as far as, guys who can create their own. And that's going to be something at a premium for them if they want to get farther in the playoffs than they did this year. And Ian, Alan Berman on YouTube is asking, are we sitting waiting for Damian Lillard? Because that's what it feels like.
I mean, a lot of teams around the league are waiting for Damian Lillard. Obviously, he's not going to request a trade now. And so it's likely if it's going to happen sometime before the regular season or during next regular season. A lot of teams, including the Knicks, are monitoring that. A lot of teams, including the Knicks, are monitoring the situation in Chicago with Zach LaVine. I mean, he came out and said that he wants to be respected. And so Chicago can, if they'd like, restructure some things with their cap and then offer Zach LaVine a big extension. but it seems unlikely. It seems like the most likely route here is LaVine ends up testing free agency next summer. So between LaVine, Beal, Bradley Beal, and Damian Lillard, the Knicks are keeping an eye on all those situations. The thing that you wonder, though, with the Knicks is in any of those trade talks, like particularly with Lillard, you would think that they could be outbid by like team like Golden State, which now has a bunch of young players, Kuminga after the draft, Moody, Wiseman to offer in packages. You would think that those packages could be more attractive than what the Knicks offer. So that's something for Allen and anybody else to keep in mind as we continue to talk about Damian Lillard and a potential Knick trade.
And going back to what CP said about, players that he would like to target, do you have any intel on those names that he mentioned, like DeMar DeRozan, Schroeder?
For sure. Yeah, we wrote, I think last week about DeMar, and he's definitely on the Knicks radar in terms of potential shot creator. I mean, we know if you watch that Hawks series, you know that the Knicks lacked a shot creator there. So that's one of the items on their list during free agency. So DeRozan, I would be a little bit surprised if he went back to San Antonio at this point. I heard that Detroit, Dwayne Casey would have some interest. And then you have the Knicks, and the Knicks are sitting there with a lot of money to offer a player like DeRozan. They could do this big, large balloon offer of a 1 or 2 year deal where you're giving him a ton of money just to get him there. So that's an option for the Knicks. The Lakers stuff, I hadn't heard that strongly for DeRozan. So they should be able to be in the conversation for him, and he's somebody that's definitely on their radar. Hadn't heard anything about Will Barton. With regards to Schroeder, he's part of the conversation for every team that's looking for a point guard. I think for the Knicks, in a perfect world, they would get a Lowry or a Lowry or a Dinwiddie or a Chris Paul. So I don't think he'd be option A for the Knicks, but if he was there and they could work something out, I'm sure they would have interest because they need a point guard. It's about necessity right now for the Knicks.
I'm just looking forward to the day when we don't have to talk about the Knicks needing to find a, consistent point guard, because it's really frustrating and exhausting even as somebody who's not even, from New York and not a hardcore fan. It's like, if they could just find, some stability in that role, that would be great. And actually, when you look at Spencer Dinwiddie, we know how he might fit in, from a basketball standpoint, but especially knowing how much he likes to troll the Knicks, how would you feel about him coming to Madison Square Garden?
Well, he would definitely have to go through the initiation process. I'll tell you that much. Because one thing Knicks fans are, they're not forgetful and they're unforgiving. So we're definitely going to give him a hard time and let him know, listen, we saw the tweets, we see you, and gotta let him go through. Like I said, it's like almost like hazing when you try to join a sorority or a fraternity. You got to go through the motions. But here's the thing. I think people tend to forget when you play for the enemy, and that is in this situation, the Brooklyn Nets, you're going to troll the Knicks. It is what it is. It's just the nature of the beast. It's now that we have two relevant basketball teams in New York. That's just what, you're going to deal with. The same situation as if a player were to transfer from the Mets to the Yankees. It's the same situation. It's just two teams that are not supposed to like each other. They make no secret that they don't like each other. It is a beef. It is a rivalry, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, he's definitely going to have to answer for those tweets, and he's definitely going to hear it for a little bit. But I think once you prove your loyalty to the New York Knicks and once you're there to play and you showcase, look, that's the past, this is the future, this is my present, Knicks fans will always remember and never forget. But, you focus on the task at hand and that is now you're in the orange and blue. Your only task is going out there every single day and winning for the New York Knicks. Your past, that other team across the bridge, they don't matter anymore. Welcome to the real New York City. We're here.
Yeah, exactly. That's all forgotten. Or that's all, something that Knicks fans will overlook, when or if, Spencer Dinwiddie is playing for the New York Knicks. All right, so Papa left on YouTube is asking, CP, can we be creative outside of free agency to acquire a point guard?
Yeah, shout out Papa Left. I mean, one of the guys I would always look at is Malcolm Brogdon, injury issues aside. He's a nice, tall point guard, plays on both ends of the floor, can give you some nice three-point shooting. I would certainly call Indiana and see if he's available. And, some of the fans like a Jalen Brunson from the Mavericks, a restricted free agent, but, maybe he could be had via sign and trade. So There's certainly some trade targets that the Knicks can look at. Obviously, they have some assets to play with. How much are they willing to let go, in kind of holding out and seeing if Dame is available? Because I think that's what they're going to do. Colin Sexton, another guy who they should probably call Cleveland and see what the asking price is there. So I think the trade market could be another option to go get that point guard because, as Ian said, some of the top options in this free agency class, it looks like it's dwindling.
CP, I have one note on Brogdon. I had heard, at least recently, that it was more likely that Indiana was going to keep Brogdon and maybe use him off the ball a little bit, but certainly hold on to him rather than trading him. So I think based on that, it would take a big offer from the Knicks or any other team to get Malcolm Brogdon. And then also you mentioned, Chris mentioned, about the revolving door around the point guard position and looking for stability. I think if they end up with like a Schroeder or a Dinwiddie, it's going to be on a short-term deal. And so I don't think you're going to get your long-term answer at point guard here. Now, if Schroeder or Dinwiddie, lead the Knicks to great heights in the playoffs, I'm sure they would re-sign Schroeder or Dinwiddie. But I think initially this summer, it's going to be a short-term deal because part of the thinking with the Knicks, at least as they've explained it to others, is they want to keep enough flexibility from a cap perspective to be in play for a max free agent in the summer of 2022. So I don't think you're going to commit a ton of long-term money to several players this summer, maybe one or two players. But I think the idea is have enough money for the summer of 22 to continue to still be in play.
Yeah, that is essential. And CP Papa Left is saying he thinks we deserve one of the indie guys in exchange for the Hibbert block.
Brogdon or Warren, man. Hey, Miles Turner, who knows, man? But yeah, it's certainly a tough moment in Knicks history, no doubt about it, man.
Absolutely. And let's talk about familiar faces now. Ashley, I'll start with you. What excites you more, Melo round 2 or Tim Hardaway Jr. round 3?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm biased. Brooklyn girl, Melo's from Red Hook. I gotta go with Carmelo. I think that Carmelo era was such a fun time for us Knicks fans. It was the last time we were in the playoffs 8 years ago when he was on the squad. I think, if that situation unfolded differently and we possibly would have waited to get him in free agency, I think we ultimately would have had a much better team in terms of success. I think because we went ahead and, we cleared house for him to get him via a trade, it's what ultimately hindered our development and our performance in the long run. I think this is a completely different team. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about Carmelo, and this is the Syracuse in him, he's not a big defensive player. The Knicks are a defensive team now. This is not the team of 2013, 2012 that Carmelo was a part of. You got to play defense on this squad, but you cannot deny the fact, one, how much New York City loves Carmelo Anthony, and two, he can still shoot, man. I mean, he can shoot the lights out. I beam with such pride. It's almost like watching her big brother play, when I see him in Portland and just knowing that, the league gave up on him and so many people who didn't want to give him a chance. And I would love to see him come home. I would love to see him go into a playoff run with the New York Knicks. I think that this is a team that's so much different than the one he was a part of. It's so much better. And I would love to see him flourish in that environment. Now, would Carmelo be the piece needed for us to win a championship? No. But again, the New York Knicks are not one season away from winning a chip. That's not going to happen for us next season. I think we have time on our side. I think we have youth on our side with the big chunk of the guys that are on the team. And I think, our front office knows that we're playing the long game, not the short game. This is a team that we're trying to build so that, 3 years down the line, we can talk about this is a championship team. Unlike some other teams who I feel like are in a rush, like the Lakers, you see what LeBron's doing with the Westbrook situation. They want to win and they want to win right now. So clearing house for one player is not a big deal. The Knicks are not in that rush. They're not in that situation. And that really is beneficial to building a solid team that can play together for the long haul, which is something that the Knicks have been missing. We talked about this at the beginning of this season before the season even started. One thing Knicks fans have always craved is a foundation, is consistency. Instead of being a revolving door of coaches and players, we want to see the same faces. And of course, you can't keep everybody when you're trying to get in certain players, but at the core of it, you want to see the same faces in that uniform season in and season out. So To answer the question, I would love to see Carmelo. I think it would just be more of a situation. It'd be nostalgic. It's not going to be a difference maker. But as a fan, I would love to see it. Absolutely.
I mean, who wouldn't? You know, it sucks
To
because
the dome.
yeah, you wish that, you know, he'd be able to be on a team where you're competing for a championship with the Knicks, that is. But just having him back in the Garden, you know, in the orange and blue would be special for him and also Knicks fans. But once again, write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on. We'll get to them throughout the show. We've gone over our future Knickerbockers, but what about the current and some soon-to-be former Knicks? How much of this core will Leon Rose, Scott Perry, and company keep together? Let's begin possibly with the most polarizing player in Knicks history, Frank Ntilikina, who the Knicks decided not to extend a qualifying offer to. So, CP, if this is it for Frank, you guys always have your finger on the pulse of this very divided fan base. How will we remember Frank's Knicks career?
Well, I have to admit I am a card-carrying member of the Frank Hive, but you know the way I'll remember it is the guy that we took over Donovan Mitchell. Unfortunately, you know, Frank, as much promise as he had and as much defense as he could provide, he just didn't find a good fit here. He didn't have a good role here, and he went through several coaches, whether it was Jeff Hornacek, David Fizdale, Tom Thibodeau, the latter two being defensive-minded coaches, and they never really utilized him in you know heavy minutes into the rotation. So clearly there was something there that they did not see in him to give him a bigger role on this team. And so I think for the Knicks, it needs to be a lesson learned. This was a top lottery pick that you're now looking at, you know, the possibility of losing him for nothing. And so it should be a lesson learned in that we have to continue drafting well and make sure that we don't make too many of these mistakes. I do think Frank may catch on with another team. Maybe he's back with the Knicks, who knows? But if he does catch on with another team, I do think he'll find a role somewhere. But I think it's best that, you know, the Knicks just move on from him.
What about you, Ashley? If this is it, if this is the last time for Frank, or last season was, you know, his last season with the Knicks, how are you going to remember his Knicks career?
Well, unlike CP, I don't have a card. I'm not a card-carrying member of that organization. I will forever remember him as the guy we took over Donovan Mitchell, which to this day pains me. But I think, you know, as much criticism as I give Frank, he does have some solidness about him. There's aspects of his game that I think are solid, and I think that another team could benefit from. I just think that team was never the New York Knicks, and I knew that probably about 2 seasons in. I never really bought on to, you know, this is a project, this is what we're going to do, you know, we can fix him up. I'm a firm believer, for the most part, when you draft a player, yes, there are exceptions to every rule, but I think that for the most part, you want a player that requires less work and more immediate satisfaction. And Frank was the opposite of that. And I think, again, like CP said, the last 2 coaches that we've had, with the most current being Coach Tibbs, defensive heavy. And I think for me, the writing on the wall was when, you know, the reports came out that Frank was ready to go, you know, that he was healthy, he was prepared to go, and Coach Tibbs just would not play him. And he continued to play Elfrid Payton over him in many situations. That says a lot, that you have a player who's ready to go, but you just won't let him see the court. So for me, I just think that Frank never found his fit in the New York Knicks. I think the coaches throughout the years of him being on the team never found a fit for him, never really attempted to find one for him. And again, your availability sometimes is your best asset. And on top of not finding a fit for him, Frank has been injured more than he's been available. So that has also kind of hindered his development as a player, and also seeing where he would possibly fit in the Knicks organization. And that's also the unfortunate part, because you can be the most talented player in the world, but if you're never healthy and you're never available, what good is that talent if you can't utilize it? So I would love to see Frank in a situation where he can really flourish. We forget how young he actually is, you know, and his career is far from over. I just think it's over in New York.
Yeah, I think so too. And Bricks Nation is on YouTube commenting, yeah, look at Ashley smirk knowing Frank is out of here. I guess you're ready for that chapter to be over. But Ian, when you look at what the Knicks did with Mitchell Robinson, you know, picking up his team option, what is the plan with him?
Well, the plan late last season was to look at him as a starter and evaluate him over the last final weeks of the year after the trade deadline, and that plan blew up, obviously, when Robinson got hurt. And so now you talk about a Knicks team that feels like it's in good position to make trades, right? Well, Mitchell Robinson is a part of the reason why the Knicks feel good about it, because he's an attractive asset on the trade market. Now, I'm not saying that the Knicks are committed to moving him. I'm just saying that in any deal for a big time player, you have to believe that Mitchell Robinson will be coveted by that other team. And I think the Knicks, in the right situation, would make that trade. But they pick up the option. That was kind of a foregone conclusion, because you're not going to extend him this offseason. You didn't want him to be a restricted free agent. So now that you pick up the option, you see how he does this year, and you make a decision next offseason, 2022, on his free agency, but you have him there as a valuable trade chip all the while if the opportunity presents itself to be moved. And Chris, sorry, one note, Duncan Robinson, because I know he'd been mentioned as a potential target for the Knicks. I had heard that most likely at this point, people who were trying to go after him believe most likely that he is definitely going back to Miami on a multi-year deal. So it appears that he would be off the board for the Knicks. And then you have Corey Joseph. Again, people interested in Joseph feel like he's most likely going back to Detroit, so he'd be off the board for any other teams interested.
All right. So Duncan, no Duncan Robinson in a New York Knicks uniform. I'm sure we're all pretty bummed out about that. I mean, he's a good player.
He can shoot, man.
He definitely can shoot. He's one of the better shooters in the game. But not too surprising that the Knicks won't be able to get him. Looks like, based on Ian's reporting. And CP, K. Smith is on YouTube commenting, what free agency on the team, or what free agent, I should say, on the team do you believe that the Knicks should have the most priority of signing?
Yeah, well, at this point, with a lot of dominoes seemingly falling off the board, it's got to be D Rose, man. Because we have a gaping hole at the point guard position. He's a veteran that can come in, and we saw the impact that he had on this team last year when he was acquired at the trade deadline. I thought he was every bit the reason why this team obtained and maintained that 4th seed in the playoffs. So having Derrick Rose here, being a shot creator, a facilitator, getting Julius Randle involved, and having someone who can help our rookies, Miles McBride, Quentin Grimes, help them become better players on and off the court. I think Derrick Rose would be my priority. I would also look at Alec Burks. He's another guy from a shot creation standpoint. I thought he took a lot of pressure off of that second unit, being that reliable. Oh, most times reliable. He's a bit erratic sometimes, but being a more scoring option off the bench that you can go to when, quickly sometimes was a bit out of it. So I think Burks is another guy that I would prioritize. Noel, I think if he's looking for a multi-year deal out in the market, I don't see the Knicks investing that, just trying to conserve cap space for next year. Taj, I would potentially bring back as like a third option. Again, another veteran presence in the locker room would be, I think, where he would excel. But no doubt about it, Derrick Rose has to be primary. And then I would also look at Alec Burks, depending on where things go with Fournier.
So given what CP just said, Ian, Jack Parente on YouTube is asking, any chance we just run it back with D Rose, from a point guard standpoint?
I have to think that at the end of the day, they will sign a free agent point guard. You'll run it back with Derrick Rose, but I don't think as your starter. And I think that, maybe Emmanuel quickly is going to be ready to start, but I don't think that's the case. I think they have to bring a free agent point guard in here. And again, it just depends on kind of who trickles down to them. And, I guess if you're the Knicks, you hope that for some reason things fall apart between Phoenix and Chris Paul and you jump in there. But it seems very unlikely at this point. So it seems like they're going to be fighting with the New Orleanses and the Washingtons and the other teams for the point guards that are not Lonzo, who's likely to go to Chicago, Kyle Lowry likely to go to Miami, or Chris Paul likely back to Phoenix. So it's going to be a battle between the Knicks and those other teams about who they can land. And I don't think they won't be getting their first choice here, which is part of rebuilding. You're not going to be the first choice on a lot of free agents wish list when you are in the early stages of a rebuild.
Yeah, definitely not. And Ian Begley will have full coverage of the Knicks tonight, breaking down day one of NBA free agency. So follow his coverage on Twitter as well as on SNY.TV. Then tonight at 11, Ian will join Geico Sports Night to recap the Knicks move. So be sure to watch that all night and all morning on SNY. We'll also be back next week with another live edition of the Putback, where we'll recap all the Knicks moves. And looking at the bigger picture topics, Ian, you reported that this front office is making moves this offseason with the 2022 offseason in mind. Guys like Beal, Levine expected to be available. Curry's deal is up. Steph Curry, not Seth. If anybody was confused, I'm sure you were not. But the next trio also has opt-outs. So should we really expect to see more short-term and team-friendly deals in 2021?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that'll be the case. I think maybe you see, like with an Evan Fournier, maybe you see, a 2-3 year deal. But I think by and large, you're going to see shorter term contracts. However it plays out, I would think that the short-term contracts will equate to the Knicks having enough money left over to have flexibility in 2022. And also, if they sign like a 3-year deal or a 2-year guaranteed deal, I think it'll be for a player that they think that they can trade if they need to create that cap space for 2022. I think, based on the conversations they've been having with people since the combine, that is a part of their thinking. Now, if somebody falls into their lap, like a Chris Paul scenario falls into their lap and they have to commit big money beyond this coming season, I'm sure they would do it. But their thinking going into this is maintain a certain amount of flexibility for 22.
So actually, what is your take on that? Saving up for next offseason versus just going all in now, like you've mentioned, some teams, they have a shorter window and they want to cash in on that championship opportunity.
I actually am a big fan of doing little by little, at least when the Knicks are concerned, just because it's not an immediate desire obviously everyone wants to win a chip, right? Let's call a spade a spade. If the Knicks went ahead and won a championship next season, I'd be the first one on 7th Avenue for the parade. But it's not a necessity. So there are teams that are running against the clock, right? You have teams like the Lakers where LeBron's not getting any younger. He missed out on the postseason in its majority this year. You have teams like the Brooklyn Nets who are really, really high in luxury tax, and they have 3 massive contracts that they're responsible for paying. They didn't bring those guys together just to, kumbaya. They want to win a chip. That's throughout the league. You have some teams like that, right? The Knicks are in a situation where time is on their side. You have a relatively really young team, a whole lot of money to spend. There's no necessity. There's no rush to go ahead and do that all in this offseason, because ultimately the goal is to be a team that can compete consistently for however many number of years, as long as you can keep those guys together, right? Continuing to build on the foundation that you're setting in place now. If this was a team that, say, had a LeBron James on it and a Kevin Durant on the team, and listen, you can't keep these guys together much longer. Eventually, time and father time is undefeated. They're going to keep getting older. You're going to have to continue to pay them. If it's not, resulting in a championship, what's plan B? The Knicks do not have to rush the process. They just have to be smart in the process. And unlike, previous years where we have rushed things, we are in a situation where being smart is more than being quick. And right now, for me, I want to go ahead and get pieces that can build in this team, that we can build in this organization. And if the right piece is not there, and say the right piece will not be there until next season, I have no problem with bringing back a majority of the team that we saw this season with maybe an additional 1 or 2 pieces. I'm a firm believer if it's not broken completely, you don't have to fix it completely. The Knicks need to fill that point guard position, yes. There's other spaces within the organization, within the team that need to be filled, but it's not something that needs to be filled right away. I think if you go ahead and you look at that point guard position and you go ahead and you focus in on that, and even if you get a point guard that maybe is not the point guard of your dreams, but fills the void, and you bring back D Rose, that's a team that you can go ahead and still work with for next season. And then after that, in the offseason, really start focusing in on, all right, how do we build a championship team? The Knicks don't need to rush the process, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it's all about patience at this point, it seems, for the New York Knicks. And CP, on the topic of going all in now, or saving up and being conservative, is it Dame time, Sexton time, or time to keep the core together? Because I think a lot of times,
Dame time.
There it is. What, CP?
I would say you monitor Dame time, right? Because you have to see how it works out. I think ideally where the Knicks want to be is Obviously Dame likes the Knicks. Is he going to request a trade? That you don't know that right now. I think ideally you want to say, well, does Portland show him enough respect like the Rockets did Harden and send him to where he wants to go? That way, as Ian said, you have other teams that have better options, but if they send him where he needs to go, then it becomes a two-way bidding. But I think you monitor the situation, check in on Sexton, see how much that's going to cost, and then you go into this free agency similar to last year. You have your targets at a right price, and then your eyes are on 2022. But it's going to be key to get some players at least by next offseason before you give Julius Randle the max deal, which you have to expect that they're going to do. So before they do that, they're going to have to use some of that cap space to get some players here. So right now, keep the core together. See what you have, see what Grimes and McBride can do, but get some established veterans in here that can also help move this team forward to help elevate these guys and make them better. Absolutely.
And we're winding down now, so time to check back in on the trade market. Ian, could there be a dark horse trade partner to emerge for the Knicks? Taco Nacho on YouTube is asking, any truth of the report that the Knicks were pushing hard for Turner?
I know Indy was taking calls on Turner before the draft. I don't know. The Knicks, I believe, had a conversation, but I don't think there was any traction off of that conversation. So I'm sure Indianapolis will continue to gauge the market for Miles Turner. And I think that, eventually he'll get traded. We talk about it every offseason, Miles Turner on the trade market. If you're the Knicks, though, if you're getting married to Miles Turner, obviously Mitchell Robinson goes in that deal. And the one thing to mention with Miles Turner, the Knicks, even during this season, had been looking for a big that could stretch the floor, that could shoot, because, Nerlens Noel, Mitchell Robinson, they do a lot, but they don't have deep jump shots. So that was one aspect that was kind of in play. And so you look at Miles Turner, he can do that. So he would really, I think, fit well with Julius Randle offensively. So it's something to keep an eye on. But as far as I had heard, there was not any traction leading into the draft on Turner to the Knicks.
All right, and lastly, Ashley, I'll start with you. What does an A+ free agency period look like for the Knicks, and what's your worst case scenario?
A+ for me just looks like landing a point guard. My criteria for this offseason is very low because I don't see the rush in getting everything at once. I do think, though, a point guard is a necessity, whether or not D Rose and those rumors of him wanting to go back to Chicago are factual or not. And if you are able to bring him back, he just does not have the legs to go ahead and carry this team. We saw that in the postseason specifically. He's going to give it his best shot. That's just the nature of him as a player. That's just his character. But you can't expect him to play like a 27-year-old point guard. That's just not who he is. I think that you need to go ahead and get somebody who can relieve him, he can teach if he is there. Obviously, for me, it would be Alonzo Ball would be the ideal situation. I think Spencer Dinwiddie would also be the ideal situation. But even if it's none of those big names that are floating out there, if you can go ahead and get somebody who maybe is not, on the top of your dream list, if you will, but goes ahead and fills that void and fills it enough to where you can build upon that and then really start looking into the next offseason, I'm okay with that. But that point guard position is really going to be the difference maker going into next season. You can't go into next season with relying strictly on Derrick Rose and, Emmanuel Quickley. Emmanuel Quickley doesn't have enough experience. Derrick Rose is just not a spring chicken anymore. You need to find someone in the middle between those guys who can go ahead and help with facilitating that ball movement and also can ultimately create their own shot. You can't go into it the same way we went into it this season.
CP, what about you? What does an A+ free agency period look like? What's your worst case scenario?
A+ would be CP3, Kawhi Leonard. Give me Norman Powell. I think that would be A+, but not looking likely. I think realistically, as Ian said, I think we could see some balloon deals, a Schroeder on a 1+1, a Dinwiddie on a 1+1 prove it type of deal, Fournier, maybe Dwight Howard as a backup, Kelly Olynyk as a floor spacer. I think those are guys, maybe a Malik Monk on a cheap deal as well, coming off the bench. I think those are more realistic scenarios for this offseason.
All right, well, it's going to be a very interesting and drama-filled offseason for the New York Knicks, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Ashley, Nicole Moss, and CP of Knicks Fan TV. Both of them always bring the energy, always bring the fire 110%. And for Ian Begley, I'm Chris Williamson. We'll be back next week with one last live edition recapping Knicks' big free agency signings. Until then, keep it locked on SNY and SNY.TV for all your Knicks offseason coverage.